This video is sponsored by Annihilator, a new twin-stick shooter for the Game Boy Color. More in the video. To say that the Game Boy has gained a new life would be an understatement. Who knew that decades after Nintendo discontinued their handheld lineup, it would receive so many new games and exclusives? So today, I'm going to take a look at several modern Game Boy games and see whether or not they are worth your time and money. So let's get started. This is Swordbird Song, a Legend of Zelda-style game for the Game Boy Color. You play as a bird savior who was hit by lightning and washed up ashore of an island that has been taken over by the Owl King and forced its denizens to work in his tower. From there on, you need to explore the tower, solve puzzles, unlock new abilities like cutting off vines or destroying cracked blocks, and rescue its denizens. Along the way, you'll interact with the various inhabitants with whom you'll trade items. The game is basically one big dungeon with smaller dungeons contained within, the first three of which are ice, machine, and plant themed, and you'll often have to make progress in each one individually before having to stop, go back to a different dungeon theme, and unlock some new ability or item that will help you progress in a place you've been before. Swordbird also has the unique feature of not respawning enemies you've already defeated, so once you clear an area, it will stay clear forever. As a result, this game focuses a lot more on puzzles and not so much on combat. Swordbird was released for the Game Boy Color, but as you can see, the game runs in black and white, and instead, it chooses to only portray you and the various NPCs in color. A decision which I feel works well with the ice and machine dungeons, but not so much with the plant dungeon or the beach area where you're washed ashore. One thing I like about this game is that despite the dialogue being funny, it also has this depressing undertone to it, with its somber soundtrack, the lives of the towers as denizens, and the main plot as it progresses. The game is relatively short, as it can be beaten in an afternoon, which is going to be something of a theme with this video, but in my opinion, Swordbird is worth checking out. Grimace's Birthday is part platformer and part Tony Hawk, released for the Game Boy Color by McDonald's. Yes, seriously, McDonald's literally released the Game Boy Color game in 2023 to promote the Grimace Shake. What a time to be alive! A drink, by the way, which I've never had because we do not have McDonald's milkshakes in my country. Anyway, you play as Grimace and it's her birthday. But Birdie and the McBurglar have disappeared, and now it's your job to rescue them. So during the first few levels, you play as Grimace riding a skateboard, and the controls are surprisingly close to that of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 for the Game Boy Color, where you earn points by pulling tricks, grinds, and chaining them together. The difference is that instead of playing for points, you're trying to reach the end of the level before the timer runs out. You'll come across various traps that hinder you and springs that you can jump on to reach higher places, but there is no actual health bar. All that matters is that you reach the end of the level before the timer runs out. And let me tell you, if you're trying to collect the bonus Grimace shakes like I was, that timer can be really tight. Once you rescue Birdie though, the game then shifts to a more traditional platformer, where you have no means of self-defense and must once again reach the end of the stage before the timer runs out. And I gotta say, I was really impressed by the graphics during these segments. Not only is Grimace well animated, but you even have some impressive parallax scrolling in the background. I also really dig the game's soundtrack, which makes heavy use of the McDonald's I'm Living It jingle. And between missions, you get cutscenes which further what little story there is, and you even get what I assume were tweets McDonald's received during the making of this game, most of which are actually kinda funny, with people saying stuff like their lives peaked during a McDonald's birthday party or that your life is boring without one. There's a pretty great element of self-awareness and satire throughout the entire game, including the dialogue with Birdie and Grimace texting each other in acronyms and emoticons. Honestly, this game is way better than it has any right to be, with my only real criticism being how short it is. But other than that, yeah, this is honestly pretty great. This is Black Castle, an action platformer for the original Game Boy. In this game, you play as a knight armed with a set of throwable knives. Your objective is simply to platform your way to the end of each level while collecting points, defeating enemies, and picking up new weapons like axes, maces, and the like, all of which act pretty much the same, but with different firing arcs and ranges. The graphics remind me of early Game Boy games like Super Mario Land and Castlevania Adventure, so much so that I went out of my way to check if any of the graphical assets were lifted from either of those games, but as far as I can tell, all of the graphics here are original. The game even does that Super Mario Land thing where some platforms are invisible, but if you find them, it can lead you to secrets that give you health, points, and weapons. Each level is split into 3 stages with a boss at the end, and I feel the bosses are the weakest parts, as they're all kind of easy, as you can just keep wailing at them while they're still preparing their next move. Black Castle is proof that you don't need ambitious ideas to produce a great game. Sometimes, all you need is a simple concept and good execution. And in that regard, Black Castle delivers. This is Repugnant Bounty, a Metroidvania launched for the Game Boy Color. The game tells the story of how you're the only survivor of a planet whose harsh environment changed its inhabitants. And now, you're on a mission to a strange planet with the goal of hunting down monsters, with the intro and premise being clearly inspired by Metroid 2 for the original Game Boy, right down to your ship, which is reminiscent of Samus's own vessel. And the game even has a counter of how many targets you have left. At first, the planet seems abandoned and most pets are locked. But as you progress, you'll pick up melee and ranged weapons, and it soon becomes clear that the planet is not as desolate as it first seemed, with the lights suddenly turning on, enemies appearing, and shadows seemingly stalking you. I feel this game does a really good job at selling the feeling of loneliness and desolation as you explore the planet, and I quite like how rooms often have different wildlife types, not all of which are harmful, and some will even actively run away from you. It really sells the idea of an existing ecosystem and that you're the one invading these ruins. And as you explore the game, you'll find more items and abilities as well as multiple health upgrades. Simply put, this game nails the tone and style. Where it fails is in the combat. I mean, it's a little janky when fighting smaller enemies, but the flaws really become apparent when you find your targets, which are this game's equivalent to boss fights. Your movement and offensive options are simply too limited. You can't even duck or aim down while shooting. I also feel the world map opens too much too fast, making it too easy to get lost and miss rooms or locations where your targets and locations might have otherwise been. This was something Metroid 2 knew how to get around by limiting how much of the world was open to you depending on how many Metroids were left in the world. But here, I did find myself getting lost a little too much. And that's a shame too, because I really enjoyed exploring this world and the soundtrack is excellent, ranging from dark and moody to catchy and lively. And while I did enjoy this game, I feel it also suffered from missed potential. The art, mood, graphics, and exploration are top-notch. But the combat needs to be polished and the world needs to be opened up at a slower pace for the player. And a map feature would also be helpful. As it is though, this is a flawed game but one with incredible potential. It just needed some time to iron out the kinks. From Below Pocket is a port of a modern NES game to the Game Boy Color, though I've never played the original version. And this game is basically a Tetris clone but with an interesting twist. As you drop your pieces, the Kraken here will start pushing up its tentacles, and as they go up, it starts pushing up the blocks that you've already placed. And if you want to stop him, you need to clear a line that intersects with his tentacles. When you do this, he becomes startled and brings the tentacle down, giving you some respite, although it'll also leave a column of destruction in the tentacle's wake. Now, you might think that this makes Tetris more difficult, and I mean, yeah, it kinda does, but it can also be used to your advantage, as sometimes the Kraken will push pieces up and fills gaps that you originally left on your own, and as a result, he ends up clearing lines that you never even intended. So each match becomes this super interesting game of cat and mouse, where the Kraken is trying to disturb your work, but in that same vein, you're also trying to see how you can use them to your advantage. And the game even has two different settings for the Kraken. The tentacle can either climb up one spot every time you drop a piece, or it can climb up automatically after a set number of times of your choosing. Oh, and the music is excellent too. It's the type of 8-bit music that I go out of my way to listen to during my day job. I'm usually very picky with my puzzle games, but From Below Pocket is a super interesting and super simple concept that is well executed. So I say, check it out if you can. This is Powa, a traditional platformer for the Game Boy Color. You are a slime, I think? And you were out in the mountains searching for a medicinal plant. Now that you found it, it's time to return home. And to do that, you'll be crossing 4 different worlds. So you can jump and attack by throwing bubbles, I think? And that's pretty much it. The game is super simple, and there aren't even any power-ups. But don't think that makes this game easy. In fact, quite the contrary. This game is actually pretty difficult, as the platforms and enemy positioning require really strict timing, not helped by the pretty stringy time limit you have for each stage. Thankfully, the game itself is actually pretty fun, and the challenging platforming is what kept me coming back to Powa. It really is fun trying to master these difficult levels and memorize their optimal path. And at the end of each world, you'll be fighting an end boss, which can also be quite difficult. This is yet another game with a simple design but good execution, and it feels like something that could have been a commercial release from back in the day. So I say, check it out if you can. This is Goodboy Galaxy, a Metroidvania for the Game Boy Advance. You play as Maxwell, an astronaut dog who crash lands in an unfamiliar galaxy. Now, with your ship wrecked, you have to find the various parts you'll need to repair your ship, either by exploring the galaxy or talking to its residents and doing quests for them. The first thing that I need to point out is this game's presentation, because wow! This game looks beautiful and sounds beautiful. From the backgrounds, the animations, to how cute Maxwell looks, this game absolutely looks the part. As Maxwell, you can jump, shoot, and have a shield that lets you take one hit before it respawns. And as you progress through the game, you'll also be unlocking new abilities, which can be combat-centric like faster reloads for your weapon, or a charge attack which can break certain blocks, as well as more planets to explore. But see, this game has a twist. As you explore the world, you'll bump into these teleporters which steal one of your abilities. So this means you can lose your jetpack, thereby making your jump shorter, or your weapon, which leaves you defenseless, or even your shield, which means that now you can only take one hit before being sent back to a checkpoint, the latter of which can be pretty annoying too, because some sections require you to take a hit to cross them. So the idea is that you'll explore the various planets under different limitations. sections, with the different areas being interconnected, but each path will also lead to different parts of the world depending on which limitation you're currently suffering from. The game also has a ton of collectibles which can be given to NPCs as quests or are simply given to receive their friend cards, which don't seem to do much other than confirming my suspicions that Maxwell is a very good boy. I do like how the various friendship cards even have a QR code on them, though my phone wasn't able to read them. Heck, you can even find game cartridges which lets you play minigames like Minesweeper. Sadly though, this was the only cartridge I could find while recording gameplay for this video, but I know there's more. I will say that the gameplay mechanic of losing your abilities only to regain them after can be a little annoying, and I also feel the map is a bit too hard to read at times, as I often get confused while checking it out. But honestly, these are pretty minor gripes. Goodboy Galaxy is an excellent game, and one which I highly recommend you check out. This is Annihilator, a twin-stick shooter for the Game Boy Color, and this video sponsor. Yes, this is the first time I accept a sponsorship for the channel, and it's for a Game Boy Color game. How appropriate is that? Though I should point out that this is the only game in this video that is not completed yet, so some things might not be final. And also, I'm calling this a twin-stick shooter, but as you might expect, there's really no twin sticks to control this game, as you only use the Game Boy's control scheme, but you know what I mean. Anyway, the game takes place in a cyberpunk dystopic future and you were an ex-soldier of sorts, who's been turned into a cyborg. However, you suddenly wake up and the corporation who owns you is trying to stop you. And I will say, this game is surprisingly heavy on the story, with tons of well-drawn cutscenes, and though the plot is nothing outstanding, I was drawn to it. I also like how even though this is a twin-stick style shooter, at times the game will change perspective and it becomes a side-scroller, with you riding a bike during a vehicle section, and you'll even control a second character who has a melee weapon instead of your usual ranged attack. Like, this is a pretty ambitious game for the Game Boy Color and for the genre it's in, but I will say that the controls can take a bit of getting used to. Basically, when you start firing, you will strafe in whatever direction you're pointing, but after you stop, it'll still take a while for you to go from strafe mode to actual turning mode. It's also interesting how the levels have various rooms, most of which are optional. Basically, you have a map at the top of the screen which you can use to guide yourself, but some rooms will also require keycards which you'll have to walk around and explore to find them. Sadly though, I feel that there's two issues that hold this game back. The first is the lack of power-ups or a secondary weapon. The weapon you start out with is the weapon you'll be using throughout the entire game. You can pick up usable items, but the med pack was the only one I could find. And the music also left a lot to be desired. But according to the developer, the final soundtrack has not been added in yet, so what we're listening to is either an early version of the soundtrack or a placeholder soundtrack. But still, this is a pretty awesome and ambitious game for the Game Boy Color. I really can't think of any other game quite like this for the system. And the developer is even working on a physical cartridge edition for the Game Boy Color and a 3D version of the game for PCs. And the best part, the developer is actually having a sticker sale for the Game Boy Color, PC, and physical editions of this game over at itch.io, where you can get any version of the game. The sale will only last up until April, so if this game seems like your thing, be sure to check it out. And if you do, you'll be helping the channel as well. Anguna Warriors of Virtue is a Zelda-like for the Game Boy Advance. You begin in a dungeon with nothing but a sword and need to crawl your way out of said dungeon. Once you're out, the game opens up with an overworld, which you can explore at your own leisure. As you do this, you'll gain new items like arrows, traps and bombs, which can be used in combat. Clearing dungeons will also net you special items like the lantern, which will illuminate dark areas, as well as other items which let you walk on water, for example. And as you explore the world, you'll often find caves with people who will either heal you or sell you items and more ammunition for your arrows and bombs. You might also find items that increase your defense or attack points permanently, allowing you to take or dish out more damage. I feel this game is just okay. The concept is solid, but the music can get really repetitive, especially the world theme. I mean, even when you're exploring the desert land, it's still using the same world theme. I also feel this game is super light on the puzzle elements. Almost every room basically devolves into one of two things. Either you need to defeat every enemy to open a door, or you just need to have the right item with you from a previous dungeon. It also does not help that dungeons don't have enough keys for every door, so you'll often have to buy them from a vendor, allowing you to fully explore dungeons for their optional upgrades. Anguna really kind of feels like it's on the opposite end of Swordbird. Swordbird was mostly focused on the puzzles, as every enemy you fight would stay down after being defeated. But here, there's hardly any puzzle, so you'll spend most of your time grinding foes, and it can get a bit repetitive. It's not a bad game or anything, but it could be better. The Mayor of Sanctuary is a Zelda-like for the Game Boy Color. You are a wizard and the former mayor of the town of Sanctuary, having just retired from a previous position. However, a magical curse is affecting the town that is preventing the sun from rising. So now, you set off on a new quest to figure out what happened and ensure the sun returns once more. So because of this, the game takes place entirely at night. And it's kind of interesting how the Mayor of Sanctuary is so different from Anguna or Swordbird. Anguna was combat focused, Swordbird was puzzle focused, and the Mayor of Sanctuary is focused on the town, the wilderness and the NPCs. This isn't to say that there won't be plenty of combat and puzzles to solve, as well as upgrades to collect of course, but it is the most RPG one of the group. This is because, as a former mayor, you have to collect the 9 keys from each town resident, and they'll all give you quests and side quests in return for upgrades and their keys. So while some quests can be pretty simple, like taking care of someone's chickens, others require you to put the wandering souls of a nearby cemetery to rest. Along the way, you'll pick up upgrades like the axe, which can cut down tree stumps blocking your path, as well as permanent health upgrades. And I have to admit, I really like how this game gives you the feel of a tight-knit community that is a town of Sanctuary. And there's even a bit of a plot twist at the end that I honestly did not see coming, but was also kinda surprisingly wholesome. I do wish the game itself were longer, as it's a little on the short side and the music, while not bad, is nothing particularly outstanding. But overall, this was a pretty fun game and I say, check it out if you can. This is Hunter in the Lost Forest for the Game Boy Color, and it's a top-down shooter, kind of like a cross between Zelda and Annihilator, only it's pretty terrible and not worth your time. But I am talking about this game because the developer has made not one, not two, not three, but 4 Game Boy games in the span of just 2 years, and we're going to take a look at all of them, from worst to best. But yeah, Hunter in the Lost Forest is a super basic game, and it honestly feels like little more than a tech demo. I'm surprised that this got a final release because it's just so basic. So yeah, moving on. The Adventures in Carnal Hell is a turn-based roguelike by the same developer who made Hunter in the Lost Forest, and I feel that this is a better game. This is a very traditional roguelike with your movement and that of your enemies being turn-based, though some foes can move several turns before it's your turn to move again. At first, the game is easy enough, as you can dispatch foes in just 2 hits, but as it progresses, you'll need to be sure that you're gaining enough experience to level up and take down your foes. Thankfully, when you level up, you also completely heal up and regain your mana, and if your health is running low, you can cast healing spells. After all, you are playing as a cleric in this game. Additionally, you might also run into chests with helpful items like potions or antidotes, though you can only carry 1 item at a time. You also need to watch out for status ailments like poison or fear, as well as traps which can spring up from anywhere. One thing I find that interesting is how this game is kind of spicy actually, which is a little surprising because it's not super obvious at first. You know, if we ignore the title screen. But basically, some status ailments make you feel, yep. You can see where I'm going with this, right? And when that happens, certain attacks will have their animations and descriptions changed to things that I can't really show here. Overall though, the game is alright I guess. The room designs repeat a little too often for my taste, and as far as roguelikes go, it's a bit too basic for its own good. In my opinion, it needed more to stand out. Next up, we have Mage and the Grimore of the Beast, a shmup for the Game Boy Color. You play as an anime witch who, while cleaning her master's workshop, knocked down a magical grimoire and opened it by mistake, releasing all sorts of magical monsters. So now, it's up to you to bring them down. And I feel that this game is a step up from the previous 2 titles by the same developer. At first, this seems like a pretty basic shmup for the Game Boy, though it is cool how you have parallax scrolling in the background, even if set scrolling is a bit too jerky for my taste. But as you defeat the various bosses, you'll unlock new outfits which give you different abilities. So for example, the slime outfit effectively doubles your hit points, while the worm outfit gives you an option power-up that follows you and doubles your firepower, and so on and so forth. It's kind of interesting too because the game over and boss defeat cutscenes will also change depending on what outfit you're wearing. I'm honestly starting to think the developer behind these games is more interested in character design than actually polishing his titles. But overall, yeah, I actually enjoyed this game. I do feel that it's still a little too simple for its own good, with only 6 levels to complete, and that scrolling speed really needs to be fixed. I also don't really like how the only item you pick up during gameplay is a speed boost. I feel like some weapon upgrades would have been a welcome addition as well. And finally, while I really enjoyed the suit unlocking mechanic, I can't help but feel like it would have made more sense if the game had instead let you select which levels you want to tackle first, instead of having you play them in order. That way, you could strategize on which suits you'd want first and how you'd tackle the remaining levels. As it is though, this is a pretty fun game, though there was definitely potential for more. And finally, we have Fighter on the Path of Glory, an action platformer by the same developer as the previous 3 games. You play as a monk, and each level is separated into 3 different stages, which can either be boss fights or platforming levels. The boss fights are honestly pretty weak, as you can kind of defeat most bosses by just wailing at them and ignoring whatever damage you take. But the platforming levels are surprisingly fun. You can jump and shoot fireballs, and the very various levels are also hiding 3 coins each, which you'll need to unlock the final world. And just like Black Castle, it shows that sometimes all you need is a simple concept and execute it well to have a really fun game. Because the platforming segments are really nice here. And I also quite like the background graphics with nice appealing colors and simple but pretty animations. It's kind of ironic that this developer's best title is also their only game that does not have any spicy content. But overall, yeah, this is pretty fun. Check it out if you can. Okay, stop me if you've heard this one. Hime's Quest is a Zelda-like for the Game Boy Color. Yes, it's another Zelda-like. The good news is that this one is honestly the best one of them all. Hime's Quest is a game by Crunchyroll of all people, where you play as Hime, the mascot from the anime streaming service Crunchyroll. And the story goes that it's the year 1999 and Hime brought a new anime DVD to share with her friends, when they were suddenly isekai to another dimension. Well, actually, not just them, but the entire town was also isekai'd. Out of all the Zelda-like games from this video, this is the most Zelda one of the group. By that I mean that the gameplay and focus is made to pretty much mimic the Game Boy Zelda games. So you have towns, dungeons, quests, and new items in equal measure. In fact, replace Hime with Link and the modern town with some fantasy town, and you wouldn't even tell at first that this isn't a Zelda game. So, as Hime, you must now search this new world for the cause that brought you and your whole town here, meet with the locals, gain new items, and explore dungeons. A lot of the dialogue is made to be tongue-in-cheek though, like how you get to meet Junji Ito and you even meet a character called Salty the Witch, as well as other anime references which pepper the whole experience. I also have to admit that I really like the graphical style of this game. While the other Zelda-like games from this video were taking the Game Boy Color's graphics in interesting and new directions, something which, don't get me wrong, I appreciate. It's also really good seeing a game that looks exactly like what a game of this genre would have looked like back in the day. And the music is also varied and absolutely excellent. Even in terms of length, Hime's Quest is quite clearly the lengthiest out of all the Zelda-like games we took a look at today. It's still not quite as long as Oracle of Ages or Link's Awakening, for example, but this feels like a commercial release through and through, which is a good thing because I actually do own this game physically. I also really appreciate the dungeon designs, which have the right mix of combat and puzzle solving. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it replicates the feel of the Game Boy Color Zelda games down to a T. In fact, if I had to pick one criticism for Hime's Quest, is that it's a little too similar to Zelda. Don't get me wrong, if you love Zelda, you will most definitely enjoy Hime's Quest. But if you want something a little different, I'd sooner go for Swordbird or Mare of Sanctuary. Or if you haven't played Zelda in a long time, you're honestly better off just playing Zelda. But if you only view it on its own merits, Hime's Quest is a great game, so be sure to check it out if you can. Deadeus is a horror adventure game for the original Game Boy. The story is that you're a child growing up in an idyllic seaside village when you and some of your friends start having nightmares about some otherworldly deity telling you that you only have 3 days to live. From there on, you have to go around the town, talk to people, collect items, and use said items to figure out what's going on and how to survive. And this game has multiple endings, so the items you get, where you use them, how you use them, and when you use them will impact the story. And despite this game looking like a Pokemon ripoff, there's no actual combat. Deadeus has some very clear Cthulhu or cosmic horror vibes to it, and in fact, while playing this, it really reminded me of John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, as you can tell something is coming and you only have 3 days until it arrives, while the grown-ups are blissfully unaware, hiding something, or outright lying to your face. And as the fated 3rd day draws nearer, the horror elements become stronger and more prevalent, like when you look at the sky and you see the sun slowly shattering with each passing day. I especially like one ending in particular where it feels like you were doing the morally right thing, but once you actually get there, while it's unclear what actually happened, it was definitely not the ending I expected. I feel like there's something to be said about an original Game Boy game that actually manages to give you a feel of dread and existential horror you'd find in a Lovecraftian novel, and for that reason alone, Deadeus is worth checking out. This is Nyghtmare, the Ninth King, an action platformer for the Game Boy Color that is clearly inspired by Castlevania. Sadly though, I couldn't really get into this game despite having some great potential. Like, when it comes to style, this game absolutely delivers, giving you 2 characters to choose from and some really nice backgrounds. But the physics are pretty weird, especially your jumping physics, which seem inconsistent. And it doesn't look like you get a grace period when being hit, which means you can end up suffering multiple hits for a single strike. And the music has some major issues. I mean, sometimes it's fine, but other times it sounds like this. Which I honestly thought was an emulator issue, but checking out gameplay videos on YouTube, it certainly does not seem to be that. And finally, it's kind of weird how your sub-weapon is assigned to the select button, which is a terrible placement for a game where you need to make split-second decisions. It's kind of weird too, because the original Castlevania addressed this issue with the very first entry into the series. And I also feel that some of the sprite designs need to be revised, like half the time I don't even know what I'm looking at. Which is odd because the backgrounds are generally excellent. Now, to be fair, all of these issues are fixable, but as it is, I can only hope that there will be a revised edition in the future, or at the very least that they are corrected for the sequel. The Melting Apartment is a horror adventure game for the Game Boy Color. You're a private investigator who is called in to find a missing person. But as you arrive at her apartment, it's clear that something is wrong. From the building manager's twisted smiles to the behaviors of its denizens. And looking at the art, I'm pretty sure I'm getting some Junji Ito horror vibes from this game. Which, if true, that makes the second game in this video that references that particular horror legend. So, throughout the game, you'll be talking to people and picking up inventory items and using them at the right time. And I really want to love this game, but it's so short that it almost feels more like a tech demo. You can honestly finish this game and see all 3 of its endings in just 15 minutes, which is such a shame because, my god, the mood and ambience here is so incredible. If you're the developer behind this game and you're watching this, I'm begging you to make this game longer, or at the very least make a longer sequel, because I truly love this experience from beginning to end. But unfortunately, I also can't show much without spoiling the story, so I'll just say that you owe it to yourself to playing this. And finally, we have Traumatarium, a game that is part RPG, part simulation, and part visual novel for the original Game Boy. The story is that the kingdom is beset by a great evil, and you have been summoned as the champion of the people to clear the Traumatarium and save the land. So you begin at a town with limited money where you can buy weapons, armor, potions, bandages, and food. And once you're done, you can select from 3 possible dungeons before unlocking the Traumatarium as the final dungeon. And the way this game is played is pretty interesting. Basically, as you enter the dungeon, you get a randomized event. Some will play automatically, which can result in you getting hurt, being healed, finding items, or sparking a battle, while others will require you to make a decision, which depending on the room and choices you make, will have a multitude of outcomes. Combat is turn-based, but you can only attack or use items. The strategy being that with each chapter in the dungeon, your character gets hungrier. But you cannot use items until you reach a battle. So once a battle begins, you might have to spend a few turns eating food or healing up from the previous encounters and randomized events. And as you clear a dungeon, you can use the gold you gained to buy new gear and items before progressing to the next one. Though you can also repeat previously cleared dungeons, which will now be easier because you've defeated the final boss. And I gotta say, I really love this game's visuals and how it tells its story, as it feels heavily inspired by Choose Your Own Adventure books. Sadly though, the game is rather short, and I feel that there's room for improvement with the possible outcomes, rewards, and punishments for each random event. But as it is though, this game was a truly unique gem, and is worth a playthrough for that reason alone. And there you have it, a look at a selection of modern games for the Game Boy. Are there any games I missed? Be sure to let me know in the comments. And once again, I'd like to thank Salt and Pixel for sponsoring the video. Be sure to check out their sticker sale of Annihilator for the Game Boy Color. And if you purchase a game during the sticker sale, you'd be supporting the channel as well. In the meantime, I'd like to thank my newest Patreon supporters, including Lucas Shaper, Vitor Rodrigues, and Skittle. Thank you for helping make the channel better. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!